would like to welcome you to the Microsoft Virtual Hub and the first ever online virtual Ignite. Now, today we're going to talk about Teams tabs inside out. So, let's start with a quick recap because I'm expecting you already know everything about Teams and Teams development, especially tabs. So, as you might know, we already have two types of tabs. So, we have the static tabs and the configurable tabs. We also have three types of tab scopes: Teams, Personal and Group. As you know, in your team, Personal is just for you alone, or in a group if you have a group chat. Now, a Personal tab is always a static tab. It's for a single person and you just configure one URL and there all the magic happens. A Teams or a Group tab is always a configurable tab. That's the way the types and the scopes are linked together. They're shared by everyone in that team or in that chat, of course, and there are multiple pages that we need to create. Now, let's get started with a quick demo about our tabs recap. So, as you know, we can start Teams development in multiple ways. I want to give a quick shout out to how we can do that. Of course, you have App Studio, which we can use. We can use the integration for the Microsoft Teams directly from Visual Studio, so the Microsoft Teams Toolkit for Visual Studio. We could use the Microsoft Teams Toolkit for Visual Studio Code, and we can use, of course, the PnP generator, the Yeoman generator, YoTeams. Now, we can do that. We can start our tabs in multiple ways. One of the easiest ways, of course, is just starting with App Studio. If you open up App Studio, you can start with a new manifest editor. Let's create a new app, and of course, here you can see, let's create our tab. Let's start with Personal tab. We give it a name, so my Personal tab. We give it a unique ID, my tab. This is only important if you start with multiple tabs, multiple personal tabs, and you need to know which one is which, of course, so you need to be able to separate them. And then you give your content URL. Remember, like I said, you only need to give one URL. Now, as you can see, we can do the content URL and the website URL. What's the difference in these? Well, the content URL is the URL that Teams shows, and the website URL is if you click on the little icon. So if I open up my app, the little icon you see here, the website icon, this one, this little one, then you can open up your app directly. Why is this important? Well, if we go, because what you click together in either the tool, the Microsoft Teams Toolkit, or Yeoman, or App Studio, it all boils down that you change the manifest. So let's take a look at our manifest. So if I go to a static tab, I'm going to create my manifest. So I just created a lunch tab and it goes to this URL. Of course, I have ngrok running, otherwise I would not be able to connect to my local machine. Now we're going to call our lunch controller, and as you can see, I already gave some query parameters. This context of Teams. Now, why did I do that? If I go to my content URL, of course, I want to know I'm in Teams. If I go to my website URL, then I'm not in Teams. Why do I do this? Well, as you can see, here we don't have a navigation, which is already quick, simple. If I open up the website, then we do have a navigation. It's always important in Teams that you should remember that we already have a Teams navigation. Here we can already select the About page. We can select our static tab. We already have the left app pin bar. We have the top navigation with the search bar. So you don't want to overcrowd your application with navigation. But if you have a real website behind the application that can also be used, then of course you need some kind of navigation to make it simple. Now, this is in C#, as you can see, but the same is valid for Node.JS. So if we go to our manifest.json here, you can see I already created a static tab, gave it the same entity ID and name. I gave it a content URL. So this is because of the configuration, it will just use my URL, and I've already said I want a personal tab. Now if I go back to my application, then we also have a second app. This is the Node one, and it will also show my lunch options. Don't look at the styling, I'm not a CSS guru, of course. So this is our static tab and how we can create simple static tabs. Just a quick recap. Now on to configurable tabs. Configurable tabs are activated or can be used in the Teams context or in our chat context with multiple people. Now, they work in a similar fashion as static tabs, just a little bit different. As you can see from the manifest, this is our static tab. So we just give it a content URL and a website URL. While with a configurable tab, we don't have to give it an entity ID, a name, or a website URL. We just have to give a configuration URL, which is the URL that's first called, and there we'll have to put the configuration of our tab into. And then, of course, we need to say if we can, or an end user can update the configuration, which means if you click on the tab, then you can click on the settings button. If you don't put this to false, then there will be no settings button. And then of course we have to scope it. In this case it's a team or a group chat, or we can take just one of these two. We cannot of course scope it to personal, because personal is kept for static tabs. Now this configuration URL is something where the magic happens. So if we go to Teams and we start our configurable tab, let's just add it. This one is in C#, let's add it. Then the first thing we do is we go to this configuration page. There we go. In this configuration page, so this is the configure. If we go to what happens in this configuration page, so this is our configuration page. Where's our configuration page? It should be here. There we go. So configure, that's the first thing that happens. Now as you can see here, it doesn't happen in backend code, not much happens. It's just in the view that happens. It's all happening in the JavaScript code of that page. Why? Because of course you load the page, Teams loads the page here, as you can see, and we have to do something in here. We show these little checkboxes to choose an office location, but of course we need to submit that information to our backend, and we need to enable this save button. Now how does that work? If we go to our configure page, then you can see this is the simple code of the page you just saw. So welcome to our company news app, select your office location and give me the checkboxes. So nothing special, all magic happens in the JavaScript backend. So let's check out the JavaScript backend of the news configuration. Here a lot of things happens. First of all, we see that once we save our button, Microsoft Teams will need to know that. So we'll have to tell Microsoft Teams, yes, you can enable the save button. And then, of course, when we enable the save button, we have to, like in a static tab, tell Teams what is our website URL, our content URL, our entity ID, our name of our tab, and of course, if we want to, a remove URL. So if you remove that that configurable page or that configurable tab, then you can also have an additional screen so that you can clear up your database or your backend code with that information that the tab is no longer valid. So it's the same as with the static tab, only this one we have to set in backend code or in JavaScript code the information. So once we go back to Teams and we select submit order, then this will be kicked off and we'll say to Teams, hey Teams, can you please set the validity state to true? And Teams will do that, and while doing that it will enable the save button. Once the save button is enabled, so if you have a blank page here, no problem, just execute that small piece of code and the save button will be activated immediately. Then our app will get loaded, our tab will get loaded. So this is the news overview of our Asian office. Now, of course, we also needed to save that information, so I do a simple AJAX call here, nothing special, nothing fancy, just to save that configuration. Do we need, was it the Asian office or the European office or the US office? This will get saved to our save configuration, which is here just a simple read of the API call and save that. This way we know what information to save. Now, in Node, this is exactly the same. So first off, if we go to our manifest, our configuration page or configurable tab goes to the config page. It doesn't set the name or the entity ID or the content URL. No, everything has to be done in the config page. So let's go check out our news tab config. Here we have the same thing. So America, Europe or Asia, our office locations. And once we want to enable this, so once we show select your office locations, and once that office location is selected, we should enable the save button. So let's see how that works inside of Teams. So we add our tab. This one is our Node application. With our Node application, if it loads, there we go, we can select our office location. This time let's take Europe, and you can see once we selected something, the save button was enabled. Why is this? This is because once we select something, so the on change event, meaning we should enable the save, and we tell Teams, okay, this is our content URL, so call this URL with the news. As you can see, in C# we did an API call in the backend to save it to our database. We don't have to do that. Why? We can also just say, okay, tab, because Teams will remember the location for that tab. We can also use a query string to add that to the key value pair, depending on which kind of solution you're building. Or if you want to, if you have to save a lot, here we just have to save a simple location, which is just one of 3 values. So pretty simple. We don't need to do an API call. We can also do it like this. And the same thing again, we set the validity state to true. So we tell Teams, yeah, put that save button, you can enable it. And once you save, then remember, this is our URL, this is our entity ID, and this is our suggested display name. There we go. So we selected that and we hit save. Then Teams will set up our tab. And of course, this will know this is the European office. Why? Because in the query string that's behind this tab, so if I switch back and go back, this will call in the backend, or in the little iframe that's here, it will call the same URL but with the query string, so my code knows, okay, this is the information I need to show. It's the information from the Europe office. So, quick recap on configurable tabs. So, this was a quick recap of static and configurable tabs. Now that you know how to build one, you already knew, but now we add a fresh reminder on how to build one. There's also something important that we must not forget. Sometimes we do want to talk to Teams to get more information. Who is using our app, for instance, or what's the team of the user using our app? With this information, we can have more interactivity with our app, with the user, and with Teams. But we need a way to talk to Teams to get that information out of there. So for that, the Teams team has provided us with the Teams JavaScript SDK. This little helper library will help us to get information, or will talk to Teams from our tab. Now, a little tip, always check what the latest version is, because the version moves up quite fast, and with the latest version always comes the newest things. Now, it's simple and easy to use. We just add a reference to that little JavaScript library in our HTML file, so in our page, and don't forget to initialize it. We of course need to initialize the library. So we add a reference, we initialize it, and we're good to go. So let's take a quick look on how to use the Teams JavaScript SDK so that we can talk to Teams from our tabbed application. So, our Microsoft Teams JavaScript library. First things first, let's check what the latest version is. If you go to npmjs.com, there you can find the latest version. As you can see, this is version 1.7 at the moment, which was published 3 months ago. So, not that old, but as you can see here, last published 8 days ago, which is not that long ago. So always see that you have the latest version. Now, how does it work? Well, let's go to our Visual Studio code. First thing, we'll just add a reference to our Teams JavaScript SDK. Just a script source tag, and it's in there. Now, that's just one thing, so it gets loaded into our, this is a partial view, gets loaded into our partial view. But as I said, you'll also have to initialize it. Well, how can we initialize it? Well, let's see to the code. There we go. First things first, we Microsoft Teams.initialize it. And then we can get started. Like I said, as an example, we can, of course, for instance, get the team. So what do? We do Microsoft Teams get context, and we can get the team out of the context. Which means that once we hit our app, we can just say, okay, whatever the team is, just follow along. So this is when the app starts. I'm just changing one tag, so you should do a very different color scheme, of course, but this is just for reference, one small tag. Now, that's just one thing, because okay, we can get information from the context. There's a lot in there, but we also want to know, let's say for instance somebody changes the theme once we're in our application, once the tab is open. yeah, this thing will only trigger once. So we'll have to do a register on team change handler. So there's also change handlers in there. If you want to know what everything that's in there, then I'll suggest you take a look at the documentation. But we can also get notifications, which means that once the team changes, we can change our color from the theme. So it can go to default or dark. We just change one color again. Very simple. So this little just piece of JavaScript will change the color of the theme. So let's see how that works. If we go to our app again, so let's go this one. Or let's just open the static one, maybe even better. So this one, our company app. This is our company app. Now let's just change our theme. So we go to settings, and there we go. As you can see, the moment we change our theme, something changes. It's the H1 header, so the header that changes color. I should do everything, as you can see, because yeah, if somebody sets his theme to this color, then my app really sticks out like a sore thumb. But this color is already the same, so you should do that for everything. Now let's change our theme back. So this is the event handler that gets triggered once we change it. So it just follows along. As you can see, everything with themes is registered to that change handler, so everything changes color. If we go to somewhere else, let's say to our calendar, and we change our mode here back to dark mode, and then we open our app, then it's the first piece of code that gets triggered. So this triggers the first time and changes the color of our app. Now for reference, let's go back to our normal theme. There we go. Now we can do the same thing in Node.js. The cool thing about Node.js is that it's already, if you create a new app with the generator or with the Themes add-in, then of course it's already set for you. So we import it from Microsoft Themes.js and it's already available. If you create one just out of the blue, just a new clear app, it's already available, the Themes context, so you don't have to add a reference yourself. So here we do exactly the same thing. So if update theme is called, then we switch between dark, contrast or default mode. And how do we get that? Well, here's our register on theme change handler. So once that happens, we update the theme. Or in the beginning, if the theme, we get the theme query variable from our reference, from our manifest. As you can see, we can also do it like this. See? So this will get filled in by the manifest automatically, so that way we can get the theme as well. So you can, as we already shown you, you can get the theme from the manifest or from the URL, or you can get it from the Themes client SDK. Now how does this work? So once it's configured, where's my personal tab? There we go. Once the theme gets changed, it will change the theme of our app. We can also change another thing. So this one is, for instance, the enable print capability, which makes it pretty cool. If somebody wants to print your app, then Themes will already make sure that it looks good when you print. So there's a lot in there. I really urge you to look at the documentation of the Themes JavaScript SDK, because it can already do a lot of things out of the box, things that you don't have to build, and this library will make your life a little bit simpler and a little bit easier. So let's open up our other one. So this one again. Our Node app, there we go. And as you can see, we can change the theme here as well. Back to dark, back to high contrast, and everything changes with it, which makes our theme, our app, in conjunction with Themes, it makes it similar. So, and of course, the print capability. Let's see if I can click print here. Then instead of looking like Themes, it will already create a preview. See, it looks pretty cool. It's the top bottom, the top navigation is already stripped, so we can just show our app. Pretty cool stuff. Now, on to the next part. This was a small demo about the Themes JavaScript SDK. But the one thing to remember is when we are developing tabs for themes is that we also have to take into account normal web development rules. Meaning there are some security policies that are limiting us to do development. One of them is a content security policy, which prevents iframing, and the other one, if for instance, is the same origin policy, which prevents a web page from making requests to a different domain. Now, what do I mean by this? Let's do another small demo to make sure, to show you that it's just an iframe and that we're bound to normal iframe web development rules. First up is our content security policy, which prevents iframing. So I don't know if you ever tried that, but if we go to our Teams app and I want to add a new website, let's just take, for instance, Google. Google doesn't like that we iframe their page. So if we go to HTTPS, there it is, www.google.letstake.com, and we save that one. Then, as you can see here, google.com refused to connect. Now, why is that? Because of the content security policy. They add certain headers to the web page that refuses a browser to show their page in an iframe. This is for security reasons, so that, for instance, if this was a logon page, I cannot fake their logon page or hide their logon page into my own page, so that people can log in with so I can take people's credentials. How can we prevent that, for instance? So if I go to my own application, as you can see, it's running here, no problem, this is still running. But if I go to my, let's stop the code from running. So if we go to our startup.cs file, then I can, for instance, add security headers that stop my app, because default it's not turned on, but following normal security guidelines, you should turn something like this on, because you don't want other people, especially if you have login pages, to iframe your page. So we're gonna use our own security header middleware. What we're gonna do, we're gonna add, as you can see here, the content security policy or the X-frame options. This is the old one, to our page, to our headers, and that will make sure that our page cannot be iframed. So if I start up my code again and I go back to Teams, let's wait until this is running. There we go, we're running, and I refresh my page now, then I'm gonna get the same result as Google, meaning we're not allowed to iframe this page. So be careful if you're building tabs, that if you prevent iframing, that of course you turn it on from teams.microsoft.com, because I'm in the teams.microsoft.com domain now. So to make sure my app works again, let's just turn this off again. And the next one is the same origin policy. What does that do? Well, let's say, for instance, I'm running this, as you can see in my ngrok, I'm running this from proteamsdev.ngrok.io, and I also have a second app that's running on proteamsdev2.ngrok.io. Well, if we go to our manifest, we have to tell Teams, hi Teams, we're running this tab, so proteamsdev, but this is my valid domain. So if I add any other domain that's not in here, because we didn't tell Teams that's a valid domain that they can show or where they can get data for our tab, then something's not going to work. So let's just start this back up again, and to show you this, I've just created on the index page just a small href. Where's my news page? There we go, here's my news. I just added a small link to my proteamsdev2, so to my app that's running in Node. As you can see, this app is also running in Node, and if I go to my, let's take the browser, if I go to News 1, which is my Node app, that's working, I can refresh, no problem. If you go to News 2, working as well. But as you can remember, I didn't tell Teams that the second domain, so the News 1 domain, is allowed in the News 2 domain. So if I click on this link, we're gonna have the same problem, so it's not allowed to show, so Teams blocks that. So those two things you have to take in consideration when building tabs, because they're of course just iframes. So, and as a recommendation, if you ever have problems, if a page is not showing in your tab or a part of your application is not showing in your tab, then remember, always go to the manifest and make sure that every domain that you're using is in the valid domains list. Be careful though, you cannot add a lot of valid domains there, because if the domain is not yours, then you cannot add it, because we cannot add, for instance, google.com, because if we would ever publish our app, then that would not be allowed. Now, this was a small demo about tabs and iframes. Now that we've seen what security we have to take into consideration when building tabs for Teams, let's go down to the cool stuff. Cool stuff, HTML5 capabilities. Those have been around for a long time now, but Teams is also browser-based and the client is also browser-based, so we can take those HTML5 capabilities into our Teams development. We can use the camera, the microphone, location from within a tab. We can even set notifications if we want to. So that will make our app more responsive and more cool to use. One of them is, for instance, we can build a webcam chat client within the Themes tab. Using HTML5 capabilities is actually pretty simple. We just need some JavaScript to access the default APIs that our browser provides us with. For instance, we can use the Google Maps or integrate Google Maps with the location API of our browser. So our browser knows where we are, and we can just say to take Google Maps, for instance, to show a map and ask the browser, okay, what's our location? To do this, we just say navigator permission query, give me my geolocation. This will give, first of all, the permission. So if you didn't activate the permission yet, you know that little pop-up in your browser, this website wants to know your location. This one does that. If you already gave it permission, then no problem. And then you just say, okay, get me my current position. Now, yeah, this is just a longitude and a magnitude, so we're not much of use. So we put that into a Google Maps map, and then we can use that to show our current location. Let's see how that works in action. So if I go to my, let's say for instance, this is my C# app, because it works in both Node and C#. So if I go to my C# app, which is currently running, I can just say what's my on-site location, and it will load Google Maps, and it will say, okay, this is where you are located. So if I zoom in, I'm from Belgium, so this is my location right now. Same from our Node app, so that's also running. If we just check, okay, where's the location? There's my location. Then we see this is a little bit different of a map. Then we can see, okay, this is the city where I live. So if I zoom out, then then we can see Belgium if I zoom out a lot. In Node, it's actually just the same. So if we go to location, we need a Google API mapping, of course, so the Google API map, but we just say, okay, give me my current geolocation. And then if I get my current geolocation back from the browser, I can add that to my Google Maps. So this is my current location, to my Google Maps, and we can just say, okay, so here we get the current location, and we put that on our map. So it works for both Node, C#, doesn't matter, because it's all in JavaScript, of course. And that's the cool thing about tab development. It's all, we can use our own web development skills that we already knew. Same for instance, if you want to use the camera. So we can also use the camera. So if I want to give some feedback, I can even take the camera. As you can see here, this is my laptop camera, and I can even take a picture. So, hello, and this is my picture. We can even make it like it's a Snapchat picture, so I can put a filter on that one. Same for the C# one. So if I go to the C# one, we can say, give me some feedback, because yeah, of course, we have a lunch app, and if something goes wrong, I want to see how the sandwich was made incorrectly, so we can give some feedback. And here we have the same simple thing. We can just say, take a snapshot, and there's my picture. Okay, it's not a decent picture, but still it's a picture. How do we do this in code? Let's go look at it. So what's the feedback? Pretty simple. We just ask permission to use the camera and the microphone. So let's say, for instance, you're building some kind of chatting application, or you're building a Teams within a Teams tab. That could also be perfectly possible. Then you need to use the camera and the microphone. We're gonna build a canvas, which is normal HTML5 code, and within that canvas we're gonna get our user media. I don't take the audio for this one, because then we'll get double audio signals, but I do take my video, and if I have my video, then of course I can just take one little snap and I take a draw image. Same for Node. So if we go to our feedback file, then we can see, okay, same here, we have a canvas and a button where I click on, and then we take a picture. And what's in take picture? Well, we get the video feed, and with this video feed we just draw an image from what's in that moment on that video feed. So pretty simple. And if we want to, we can build teams within a Teams tab, of course, and we can start calling each other from within Teams tabs. I don't recommend building one of those applications, but you have to be aware this is there. So if you need to access those HTML5 capabilities from your tab, they're there for you to use. Pretty simple to use. Of course, we do need to tell Teams that we're going to use them. So let's take a look at our manifest. We do need to tell Teams, hey Teams, the device permissions, we need to ask the geolocation, and we need to access the media, because this is default blocked by Teams, of course, which is actually a good thing. But because let's say, for instance, we add a third-party Teams app to our Teams client, or we add a website as a tab to our client, we don't want them to access those things automatically. So this is the permissions. That's the same thing as the pop-up you get in your browser. So you need to tell the Teams client, hi Teams client, I'm giving permissions to use geolocation and to use media. So don't forget, if you want to use those, add them as well to your manifest and build that manifest and upload that as an app. This was a small demo about the HTML5 capabilities inside Microsoft Teams tabs. Now there's a lot more I can tell you about Microsoft Teams tab development. We haven't touched authentication yet, and that's also a long time to explain all that stuff. But we're sadly at the end because I only had half an hour to explain to you Teams tabs inside out. Now, I'm happy you watched this video. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Let me know if you have any questions. My contact information is below. You can find my social media, or find me on GitHub, or send me an old-fashioned email. If you have any questions, just ping me up and I will try to help you out. My name was Rick van Roeselt. I work for Advantev. I'm from Belgium. I just recently published a book about Pro Teams development, so if you're interested in that, please buy a copy. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the videos from the Ignite Virtual Hub. See you around.